Karen's voice dripped with icy disdain. "You don't belong in first class," she declared. Then, with a contemptuous flick of her wrist, tore the perfectly valid ticket clean in half, right before the woman's eyes, as if it were nothing but worthless refuse. Her eyes, filled with open contempt, fixated on the plainly dressed woman of color, a figure in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. Karen, however, was blissfully unaware that in less than 5 minutes, this very woman would orchestrate her termination on the spot, a public spectacle before every passenger, the entire crew, and a swarm of live-streaming cameras. This wasn't just a petty scuffle or a simple misunderstanding. It was the death knell for every egregious wrong Skywing Airlines had painstakingly tried to conceal. For the unassuming passenger Karen had just insulted was no ordinary flyer. She was Michelle Reed, the powerful CEO, a self-made billionaire, and, crucially, a major shareholder holding a formidable 25% stake in the prestigious Skywing Airlines. Michelle wasn't just celebrated for her razor-sharp, decisive leadership. She was equally renowned for her unwavering commitment to confronting social injustices, particularly racism and prejudice. Recently, deeply troubling allegations had surfaced, accusing Skywing staff of covert, systemic discrimination against passengers. The majority of victims were travelers of color who, despite possessing valid documents and the financial means to pay, were routinely subjected to rude treatment, demeaning remarks, and in some harrowing instances, were even forced to surrender their rightful seats to wealthier white passengers. Recognizing that this wasn't merely an ethical crisis, but a direct threat to the airline's reputation and its very survival, an empire she had helped build from the ground up, Michelle decided to take matters into her own hands. Eschewing tense boardroom meetings and remote directives, she opted for a far bolder, more direct approach. Boarding a Chicago-Los Angeles flight incognito, determined to secretly investigate and witness firsthand the unsettling truths festering within her own company. That morning, Michelle had purposefully chosen simplicity. She walked into the bustling airport in plain attire, a humble black t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and unassuming sneakers. There was no flashy jewelry, no discernible entourage. She blended seamlessly into the anonymous currents of travelers. Her first-class ticket, purchased meticulously under her real name, was tucked away as she calmly approached the gate, braced to confront whatever unsettling truths awaited her. What she couldn't have anticipated, however, was that in a mere matter of minutes, she would become the direct target of a confrontation unlike anything Skywing Airlines had ever witnessed. An explosive encounter that would forever reshape the airline's culture in her unwavering fight for justice. Michelle stepped lightly through the airplane door, entering the first-class cabin. Its lavish luxury and undeniable refinement unfolded before her eyes. Soft, ambient lighting shimmered across rows of premium cream leather seats, creating an almost ethereal glow. Her sharp gaze swept the seemingly flawless space. It felt almost unreal in its perfection. Yet Michelle knew all too well that beneath this meticulously polished veneer lurked the very darkness she had journeyed to expose. Before Michelle could even reach her designated seat, the head flight attendant, her expression a mask of icy disdain, strode directly toward her. This was Karen Anderson, a white woman in her 30s with impeccably pulled-back blonde hair, and a Navy uniform so devoid of wrinkles it seemed a second skin. Karen was infamous throughout the airline, not only for her pristine appearance, but equally for her condescending habit of looking down on any passenger she deemed unworthy of first-class status. Karen planted herself directly in Michelle's path, her eyes raking Michelle from head to toe, a blatant survey of disapproval. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the cabin. Then, her voice, sharp and cutting as ice, sliced through the quiet. "Ma'am," she stated with chilling certainty, "first class isn't for people like you." Her curt declaration resonated like an ominous bell in the sudden hush. Nearby passengers, drawn by the stark tone, turned in unison, their faces etched with a mix of curiosity and outright shock. Uneasy glances were exchanged, a silent disbelief rippling among them at what had just been uttered. Michelle remained perfectly still, her composure unwavering, her face betraying nothing. Not a flicker of surprise or hesitation crossed her features. She had navigated far more formidable challenges in her illustrious career. Yet, the sheer audacity of this blatant injustice tightened a knot in her chest, even as her expression remained perfectly serene. "I'm sorry?" Michelle's voice was even, almost an invitation for Karen to clarify, or, better yet, retract her cutting words. But Karen only hardened, her gaze locking firmly with Michelle's. "I think you know precisely what I mean. This is first class, Ms. Reed, a space reserved for truly special passengers. You'd find yourself far more comfortable back in economy." Karen's voice climbed, clearly intended to carry her verdict across the entire cabin, a deliberate attempt to shame Michelle into retreat under the collective gaze of watchful eyes. Whispers rippled through the nearby seats, and judgmental stares began to ricochet towards Michelle from all directions. Quietly, Michelle reached into her jacket pocket, retrieved her first-class ticket, and extended it towards Karen, a silent hope that this undeniable proof would finally put an end to the ridiculous charade. But instead of accepting it, Karen merely sneered at the document, her challenge ringing clear. "No need, Miss Reed," Karen drawled, her tone dripping with mock familiarity. "We're quite familiar with your little tricks. A fake ticket won't make you first class." With a contemptuous jerk, Karen snatched the ticket from Michelle's fingers, tearing it decisively in two. The sharp rip of paper reverberated through the cabin like a violent slap, causing several passengers to gasp and even rise in astonished disbelief. Just then, a young flight attendant, Jason Miller, sauntered casually over, a smirk playing insolently on his youthful face. He folded his arms, his eyes raking Michelle from head to toe before a sneer twisted his lips. "So, you genuinely believe that rocking jeans and a cheap t-shirt would somehow grant you access to first class?" Jason scoffed, his voice dripping with derision. "Next time you fancy pretending to be wealthy, perhaps invest a little more." Jason's derogatory remark only served to ratchet up the already palpable tension in the air. Michelle still offered no outward reaction. Instead, her gaze, now infused with steely resolve, met both Karen's and Jason's. She understood with chilling clarity that this was far from an isolated incident. It was a glaring, undeniable example of the systemic racial discrimination she had sworn to eradicate from the very airline she partly owned. As the cabin crackled with palpable tension, Michelle drew a slow, deliberate breath, silently vowing to see this matter through to its absolute end, ensuring the unvarnished, truth would be laid bare for all to witness. In just a few short minutes, those standing so confidently before her, Karen Anderson, Jason Miller, and their unwitting accomplices, would come to a shattering realization. They had made the gravest mistake of their lives, a blunder whose unimaginable consequences were about to unfold. The sharp, brutal sound of the ticket tearing echoed through the cabin, as if it shredded the last threads of Michelle's already fragile patience. The fragments fluttered down onto the plush navy blue carpet, stark white reminders of Karen Anderson's unbelievable contempt and arrogance. Michelle stood silent for a moment, the ache in her chest not born of humiliation, but of the painful realization that this toxic culture had taken root so deeply within her own organization. She bent down calmly, picked up a torn half of the ticket, and met Karen's gaze with steady eyes, waiting for an explanation, or at the very least, an apology. But Karen did not flinch. Her cold stare grew even more defiant as she addressed the cabin loudly, ensuring every passenger could hear. "You can't fool us with this fake ticket," she proclaimed, her voice resonating like a bold declaration, not only to humiliate Michelle, but to warn anyone else who might dare think they belonged in the elite section. A few passengers shifted uneasily. Some raised their eyebrows, unable to believe the sheer arrogance unfolding before them. At that moment, Jason Miller, the young flight attendant known for his cocky, disrespectful attitude, stepped up beside Karen. A mocking smile spread across his youthful face as he sneered condescendingly. "You really thought jeans and a cheap t-shirt would get you into first class? Next time you pretend to be rich, invest a little more." Jason turned to Karen with a triumphant look, as though he'd just won some petty battle. His poisonous word cut through the tension already strung tight in the cabin, making several passengers visibly uncomfortable and uneasy. Michelle, however, remained remarkably composed. She gently retrieved her ID card from her wallet, along with her sleek, black metal Skywing Airlines Elite member card, and held them both out to Karen and Jason. "You can verify my information in your system," she stated calmly. "I'm confident this will clear up any doubt." Karen glanced dismissively at the metal card, but refused to check it or acknowledge the undeniable truth. Instead, she smirked at Jason and replied, coldly, "Oh, I don't need to check. We see plenty of fake cards like that. I won't let someone like you break our first-class rules." Jason immediately chimed in, nodding in agreement and taunting, "That's right. Every time people like you flash a few plastic cards and think, we'll be fooled. First class isn't for show-offs." Their words weren't just directed at Michelle. They laid bare the deep-seated prejudice and the hidden culture of discrimination lurking beneath Skywing Airlines' glossy surface. Michelle felt a crystal-clear certainty. This wasn't a one-off injustice, but a system, a form of power deliberately crushing the vulnerable. Behind Karen's icy confidence lay a twisted way of thinking, where one's worth was judged by skin color and outward appearance. Michelle knew she couldn't allow this to continue for another day at the airline she partly owned. She took a measured breath and spoke each word with firm politeness. "I'm asking one last time," she began. "Please verify my credentials." Karen tilted her head back, a defiant glint in her eyes, her voice ringing out loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Either you leave first class now, or I'll have security escort you out." Michelle fell silent, a heavy weight settling in her chest, not from fear or anger, but from the grim knowledge that the battle ahead would be fierce, yet absolutely necessary. Within minutes, Michelle Reed would make the most important call of her life, a call not just to defend her own dignity, but to expose the painful, long-concealed truth behind Skywing Airlines' gleaming facade. A truth she would no longer allow to persist under her watch. The air in first class grew icy still after Karen's cold threat. Michelle remained motionless, meeting Karen's smug gaze as if searching for a flicker of compassion or even a shred of common sense. But all she found was ruthless determination. From that moment, it was clear this wasn't a mere argument. It had escalated into a high-stakes showdown. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed from the cockpit, shattering the tense silence. A commanding-looking middle-aged man in a captain's uniform appeared. This was Brad Collins, a veteran Skywing pilot known for his ironclad discipline and just as notorious for his inflexible, often heartless approach. He cast a steely glance at Michelle, sizing her up like a threat to be eliminated. Without so much as checking the torn ticket or Michelle's documents, Brad's authoritative voice cut through the cabin. "No more arguing. I want this passenger off the plane immediately." Delivered with absolute certainty, no hesitation, no questions. His order made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smile as she turned to Michelle, her eyes alight with victory. Beside her, Jason Miller chuckled under his breath, arms folded as though watching a private performance he'd helped stage. Less than a minute later, a female security officer appeared at the cabin door. Linda Foster, an airport security professional famed for her tough-as-nails attitude and zero tolerance for disruptions, strode forward in her crisply pressed Navy uniform, her stun gun holstered at her side. The very picture of authority. Stopping directly before Michelle, Linda's voice rang out cold and clear, plunging the cabin into absolute silence. "You have exactly 1 minute to leave." Michelle stood her ground, looking Linda directly in the eye, without a flicker of fear or hesitation. Part of her recognized that Linda was merely executing orders, but she also felt a sharp pang of disappointment at how rashly both the crew and security had handled the situation. "Before I go," Michelle said evenly but firmly, "I would appreciate one more opportunity to verify my credentials." Brad remained impassive, dismissing her with a curt wave. "We don't have time for games. My decision stands. Comply." Karen's arrogant grin widened as she watched Michelle's apparent isolation, and Jason's smirk grew even more pronounced. But Michelle felt neither anger nor defeat. Instead, a crystal-clear resolve filled her. Resolve welled up inside her. She would eradicate the deep-seated racism festering within the very company she helped build. This was no longer about personal pride. It was a moral imperative she would not compromise. Taking a steady breath, Michelle fixed her gaze on each of them. Karen's smug face, Jason's mocking grin, Brad's unyielding posture, and Linda's steely glare. She knew that in just a few minutes, these prejudiced power wielders would come to realize the gravity of their mistake. And when the truth finally came to light, Michelle Reed would stand not as the unassuming woman before them, but as the ultimate authority, ready to reshape the future of Skywing Airlines and everyone within it. The tension in first class froze completely under Linda's cold, overpowering stare. Michelle stood unmoved, locking eyes with Karen's smug expression as if searching for a flicker of compassion or even a shred of reason but finding only ruthless resolve. From this moment on, it was clear this wasn't just an argument. It had become a fierce showdown. Then a soft, trembling voice cut through the oppressive silence. I saw her ticket scan as valid. Please check again. All eyes swung toward the speaker. Emily Turner, a young flight attendant who'd been with Skywing Airlines less than a month, pressed herself against a nearby seat. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide with fear, and her hands clenched to hide their tremor. She never imagined she'd speak up in such a tense moment, especially against those in authority. But the truth she'd witnessed compelled her to act. Karen whipped around, her gaze icy and threatening. In Karen's eyes, Emily's interruption wasn't just rude. It was a direct challenge to her power in front of passengers and colleagues alike. With an authoritative chill, Karen snapped, "Emily, you're new here. Stay out of this." Her words struck Emily like a blade, warning that her fledgling career could be destroyed instantly. Jason sneered, mocking Emily's naive attempt at daring to confront such power. Emily lowered her head for a heartbeat, her body shaking with the immense pressure, her heart pounding so loudly she felt the whole cabin could hear. Then she dared to lift her eyes and met Michelle's calm, determined gaze. And something stronger than fear surged within her. Taking a deep breath, Emily found her courage and spoke again, this time clearly and firmly. "I don't mean to cause trouble, but I actually saw Ms. Reed's ticket validate at the scanner. We should check the system again before jumping to conclusions." A few nearby passengers nodded in agreement, and quiet whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Karen's eyes darkened as she realized she was losing control of the situation. Instead of backing down, she stepped right up to Emily, her voice low and cutting. "A final warning, Emily. Know your place. I don't want to hear another word." Emily trembled, her eyes glistening. Yet she refused to back down. Though she seemed fragile, outwardly inside she was powered by a steadfast belief in doing what was right. Her small act of bravery sent a silent yet powerful wave through the cabin. Michelle looked at Emily with profound gratitude. Emily's courageous voice had not only defended her, but also proved that even the greatest authority couldn't silence the truth when backed by courage and justice. In that moment, Michelle realized she was no longer alone in her fight. Standing beside her were not titles or ranks, but the support of people like Emily Turner, small yet unbreakable souls willing to stand for what's right, no matter the cost. And in that very instant, Michelle knew this seemingly unwinnable confrontation was about to turn a new page, one where the truth would finally emerge, regardless of the price. While Emily still trembled under Karen's piercing glare, tension rippled through the first-class cabin like invisible waves. Yet the young attendant's rare act of courage unexpectedly sparked a strong reaction among the passengers. People who had been silently watching and wondering what lay behind this unsettling scene. In the seat just behind them sat Sarah Johnson, a 35-year-old white American woman with light brown hair cascading over her shoulders. From the moment Michelle stepped on board, Sarah had been observing everything intently. She was a well-known travel and social justice blogger with tens of thousands of followers, especially sensitive to signs of racism, injustice, or abuse of power. Beside Sarah sat Tom Carter, a young businessman whose stern face and outraged eyes betrayed his shock at what he was witnessing. After hearing Emily's brave, trembling words, Sarah and Tom exchanged a meaningful glance. They both knew exactly what needed to happen next. Sarah immediately pulled her phone from her purse, her hand shaking with a mixture of anger and excitement. She tapped her camera app and began recording the entire scene. Within seconds, every crucial detail, Michelle's calm, resolute expression, Karen and Captain Brad's cold stares, Jason's mocking smirk, and Emily's courageous tremble, was captured in Sarah's video. She added no commentary. The images spoke more powerfully than any words could. At the same moment, Tom did the same from a different angle, ensuring not a single moment went undocumented. His grip on the phone was so tight that his knuckles turned white. Though strangers, until that moment, both Sarah and Tom understood that silence would mean complicity. Once they had enough footage, Sarah swiftly opened her social media app and posted her video with a bold, clear hashtag, Boss Skywing Scandal. Tom followed suit, uploading his own clip with the same tag. In less than a minute, their videos began attracting widespread attention online. What started as a few dozen views exploded into hundreds, then thousands of shares and comments. Outraged reactions flooded every platform, condemning the crew's racist behavior and contempt for passengers. This is horrifying. How could a major airline let this happen? I can't believe what that woman had to endure. Skywing Scandal should be a warning to any airline that dares treat passengers with prejudice. In the blink of an eye, the hashtag Skywing Scandal trended across social media, drawing in celebrities and major anti-racism organizations. News of the incident shot to the top of trending lists, forcing public scrutiny onto the misconduct that had just played out mid-flight. Meanwhile, Karen and Jason remained oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. They reveled in their ill-gotten sense of power, unaware that it was crumbling under the weight of public opinion and justice. From the start, Michelle had maintained her composure. Now she caught Sarah's and Tom's eyes and offered them a subtle nod of gratitude, knowing that their support was the turning point needed to bring the truth to light. The cabin was still, but the silence had transformed from fearful quiet to one charged with outrage and resolve. In the minutes to come, everyone aligned with prejudice and abuse would face a reckoning. Even the smallest voices of truth, when raised with courage, have the power to shake an unjust system to its core. As the passengers' murmurs swelled, Karen felt a flicker of unease beneath her once unshakable facade of authority. Her eyes darted to Sarah and Tom, who were engrossed in filming every moment. A sliver of doubt crossed Karen's mind, but she quickly cast it aside, replacing it with a defiant arrogance. She was certain she still controlled the situation, that nothing could overthrow her power. Michelle, however, stood perfectly still, radiating quiet strength. There wasn't a hint of panic or fear in her gaze. If anything, each passing second only showcased her remarkable composure under the mounting pressure from Brad, Linda, and Karen. With unhurried grace, she reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her phone, and moved as if performing a routine gesture in the eye of a storm. She dialed her special assistant, Jennifer Lee, her constant ally in Skywing's most critical board meetings. In a calm, clear voice, Michelle spoke slowly but decisively, loud enough for Karen and Brad to hear. "Jennifer, inform the board immediately. They need to know what's happening." Michelle's words, though soft, struck like a gale, shattering the tense silence. Karen sneered, dismissing it as a bluff, a desperate ploy to escape her predicament. She stepped forward, eyes full of mockery. "Who are you calling? The police?" We're the only ones enforcing the rules here. Michelle said nothing, her eyes steady and razor-sharp. She knew words were unnecessary. The actions to follow would speak far louder. A few seconds later, Jennifer's voice crackled over the line, solemn and firm, just loud enough for Karen and Brad to catch every word. Michelle, the board has received the viral videos. They're in emergency session and awaiting your next instruction. Karen froze, her mocking smile wavering. Brad's stern features tightened in surprise and doubt. A strange hush fell over the cabin as passengers began to sense that something far more serious was unfolding behind this routine confrontation. Karen shook her head, attempting to mask her disquiet with a forced laugh. Oh, I'm impressed. Who else are you going to pretend to be? A meaningless phone call won't change a thing. Michelle remained silent, her gaze unblinking. Before Karen could retort, her phone buzzed again with a voice known to every Skywing executive. Michelle, this is Michael Harris of the board. We've been monitoring the incident. We confirm your identity, CEO Michelle Reed, and are preparing to take decisive action. You have full authority to proceed as you see fit. Michael's words thundered through the cabin like a bolt of lightning, striking at Karen and Brad's hubris. Karen's face drained of color, her confident demeanor gone in an instant, replaced by palpable panic. Brad stumbled back, nearly losing his balance under the weight of this revelation. Everyone, Emily trembling in place, Sarah and Tom still filming, and every other passenger, held their breath. Many now recognized the true stature of Michelle Reed, the powerful CEO confronting her own airline's disgraceful discrimination. In that moment, Karen and Jason understood the gravity of their mistake. Once spiteful and overconfident, they now appeared small and pitiable before Michelle's unwavering resolve, this same woman whose fate they had arrogantly toyed with. The cabin seemed suspended on the verge of a great storm, one that would sweep away the deep-seated prejudice, arrogance, and wrongdoing within Skywing Airlines. And with her unshakable calm, Michelle Reed was ready to bring the truth into the light, no matter the cost to those who had wrought this injustice. The moment Michael Harris's serious voice came through Michelle's phone speaker, the cabin air seemed to freeze entirely. Karen's eyes, just moments before gleaming with cocky confidence, quickly clouded over with confusion and outright fear. The hand she'd raised to signal Linda to remove Michelle abruptly stalled mid-air, trembling for a heartbeat before slipping back to her side. Michelle, the board has received the evidence from the viral videos. We're ready to take action. The board's weighty declaration struck like a hammer blow, shattering the false veneer of authority Karen and Brad had erected. Brad Collins, the veteran captain known for his icy decisiveness, now looked so tense, he gripped the seat back to steady himself. He turned to Karen, panic flashing in his eyes, unable to believe how swiftly the situation had reversed. In that instant, the power he'd relied on to make his misguided decision collapsed entirely. Karen's jaw dropped, and she forced a strained laugh, part mockery, part desperate bid to salvage her pride. Oh, a call from the board, how impressive! But none of this changes the fact that you don't belong in first class. Her tone dripped with stubborn defiance, the earlier arrogance replaced by hollow obstinacy. Michelle said nothing, holding the phone calmly, her gaze icy and unwavering. She knew the board's word was final, an authoritative verdict, capable of exposing every layer of injustice. Jennifer Lee's voice came through again, calm but carrying the absolute authority of Skywing's board chair. "Michelle, this is Michael Harris. We confirm that you are Michelle Reed, CEO of Skywing Airlines and one of its largest shareholders. The discriminatory actions that just occurred are a grave violation of our core values and ethical standards. The board will not tolerate any behavior that disrespects our customers, especially such blatant racism." As his words ended, the cabin erupted in astonished whispers. Some passengers raised their phones to continue filming this unprecedented moment. Others exchanged looks of shock and outrage at the crew's misconduct. Karen's face drained of color. Her confidence and authority evaporated. She glanced around desperately for support from Jason or Brad, but found only silence. Jason, who had sneered moments before, now looked equally pale, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Brad stood rooted in place, stunned and deeply disappointed in himself. The seasoned captain, who prided himself on discipline, now realized he had betrayed those very principles. In the heavy silence that followed, Michelle lowered the phone and spoke, her voice calm, but resonant with absolute authority. "I hope everyone here understands that no one has the right to let their prejudice and racism override another person's dignity. I, Michelle Reed, on behalf of Skywing Airlines, will not tolerate this." Her declaration rang with unwavering certainty, extinguishing any hope Karen, Jason, or Brad had of regaining control. Those who once wielded authority now stood exposed, their grievous misjudgment laid bare. In mere minutes, the tables had turned completely. No longer was Michelle the unassuming passenger. She had reclaimed the power that was rightfully hers, leading an uncompromising fight against the prejudice and injustice entrenched in Skywing Airlines. And she knew this fateful phone call was only the beginning of the sweeping changes to come. The instant Michelle Reed's icy, commanding words echoed through the cabin, the first-class cabin dropped into a breath-stealing silence. Every passenger's gaze snapped to Karen, Jason, and Brad. Once the ultimate authorities in this flight, now frozen as if crushed under the weight of Michelle's decree. Karen, the most confident, powerful member of the crew, looked unable to believe her ears. Her lips trembled, unable to form a sound. Panic and desperation swam in her eyes as she realized the power and career she'd spent years building were dissolving before her. Her legs shook so violently she nearly collapsed, clutching at a nearby seat to steady herself. Brad Collins, the famously stern, disciplined captain, was a completely different man. His face went deathly pale, his body stiff, his eyes wide and filled with helpless regret. He understood that his own arrogance and carelessness had cost him everything. His reputation, his career, even the self-respect he'd forged over decades in aviation. Jason Miller, the young flight attendant whose arrogance and sneers had opened this ordeal, was now utterly silent. His overconfidence had vanished, replaced by utter bewilderment and fear so intense he dared not meet Michelle's eyes again. That tense stillness shattered when Michelle spoke again, her voice still cold, but even sharper, slicing through their shattered pride like a blade. "Anyone involved in this discrimination and abuse of power is terminated immediately. You have 5 minutes to leave the aircraft, and you will receive official notice of your contract termination today." Karen cast a pleading, desperate look at Michelle, her lips quivering as if begging for another chance. But Michelle remained unmoved, her steady gaze confirming that her decision was final. Brad, once unfazed by any crisis, now hung his head in shame and disappointment. Even Jason, who had once sneered so confidently, stood silent, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles seemed white, fully aware that his once promising future in aviation had vanished in an instant. A few passengers, overcome with emotion, resumed filming this historic moment, flooding social media with new posts. Skywing scandal was quickly joined by an even more powerful hashtag: Justice Served. Comments praising Michelle Reed's decisive, just action spread like wildfire. Amid the charged atmosphere, young flight attendant Emily Turner, who had trembled moments before, looked at Michelle with reverent admiration and gratitude. She understood that Michelle's fearless stand had defended not just one woman's dignity, but reaffirmed faith and fairness for countless others. Airport security officer Linda Foster, who had been poised to remove Michelle by force, now stood motionless, clearly rattled. She realized how close she had come to participating in a grave injustice and silently thanked her luck that she'd stopped short. Michelle glanced at her wristwatch, then spoke again, coolly but with unmistakable authority, as if ringing down the curtain on this storm. "Your time is up. I suggest you leave now." Her final command sounded like a gavel drop, signaling the absolute end of the crew's unjust power. Karen, Brad, and Jason had no choice but to gather their belongings slowly, painfully, under the judging eyes of the passengers they had so grossly offended. As the three of them trudged toward the exit, the cabin remained silent. But now it was a silence rich with meaning, the triumph of justice, the power of courage, and the unmistakable message Michelle Reed had sent to all of Skywing Airlines, that any act of injustice or discrimination, no matter how small, would be met with a steep price. And Michelle knew that this was the pivotal moment, the beginning of a sweeping revolution she would never abandon until Skywing Airlines had purged every trace of prejudice and injustice from its heart and soul. As Karen, Brad, and Jason's figures finally disappeared beyond the cabin door, the tension in first class gave way to a collective sigh of relief. Michelle remained standing, her cold gaze following the three as they trudged away, each step marking the moment they lost everything. Yet she knew this wasn't the end. The most crucial task now was to expose the full truth transparently and unequivocally, so nothing like this could ever happen again. Just as the atmosphere began to calm, a small, trembling figure stepped forward. It was Emily Turner, the young flight attendant who only minutes ago had been paralyzed by fear. Now her eyes sparkled with determination, even as her hands shook. Emily approached Michelle, took a steadying breath, and held out her phone. "Miss Reed," she said softly but firmly, "I have critical proof. I recorded Karen and Jason conspiring to delete your seat information from the system to justify removing you from first class." Instantly, the cabin fell into stunned silence, every pair of eyes fixed on Emily and the tiny phone in her unsteady grip. Michelle gave her an encouraging nod. "Play the recording, Emily." Emily's voice wavered at first. Then she steadied herself and hit play. In the hush, the voices came through clear. "Just erase her name from the seat list, Jason. Someone like her doesn't belong here. A quick tweak in the system. No one will ever find out." That was Karen's cold, confident tone. "You're right, Karen. No one's going to believe a casually dressed woman of color is a first-class passenger. Piece of cake." Then Jason's mocking laugh. The recording ended and the cabin erupted in whispers of disbelief. Passengers exchanged incredulous looks. The raw, bitter truth was laid bare. No one could deny or excuse Karen and Jason's blatant racism. Emily bowed her head, tears glistening in her eyes. Whether from stress or emotion, it was hard to tell, but she knew her action could change her career's course forever. When she looked up, she met Michelle's gaze and saw nothing but pride and respect. Michelle gently placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, her voice resonant and sincere for all to hear. "You did exactly the right thing, Emily. Skywing needs people like you." Her praise washed over Emily like a warm current, easing the tension in her young heart. Fellow passengers nodded in agreement. A few even offered soft applause honoring Emily's courageous stand. Linda Foster, the security officer who had been poised to haul Michelle away, now stood frozen in awkward shame. She realized how close she'd been to enabling a grave injustice and silently thanked her conscience for stopping her. Michelle turned to face the entire cabin, her voice ringing with determination. "We have just witnessed a painful but necessary truth. Such behavior will never be tolerated at Skywing Airlines again. I promise you this airline will never allow prejudice to dictate the treatment of our passengers." Her declaration landed like a powerful proclamation. Everyone gathered sensed its weight. They knew they'd just witnessed history. A turning point that would reshape not only Skywing Airlines, but also how people treat one another in society. Emily stood quietly beside Michelle, her shoulders still trembling, not from fear anymore, but because she understood she had done the right thing. From this moment on, she was no longer just a trainee flight attendant. She was a symbol of courage, proof that even the smallest action can spark great change. And Michelle, looking out at the passengers whose face she had just restored, knew that today was only the beginning. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead to ensure Skywing Airlines would not only be the finest airline in the sky, but also the fairest one for all. Michelle's forceful declaration still reverberated through the cabin, leaving a powerful impression of justice and courage on every passenger. In that emotionally charged moment, Michelle turned to Linda Foster, the security officer, who only moments ago had stood ready to enforce a grave decision. Michelle's gaze bore no accusation, but it carried enough authority to leave no room for hesitation. "Linda," Michelle said calmly, yet with unmistakable command, meeting Linda's eyes as the officer stood frozen at her side. "Escort these people off the plane immediately. This is no longer a request. It's an order." Linda Foster, known for her strict professionalism, felt her heart tighten for the first time. She understood that one wrong call could jeopardize the career and reputation she'd worked so hard to build. Linda locked eyes with Michelle, then gave a small, resolute nod, an unspoken promise that she grasped the gravity of what she'd witnessed. With firm determination, Linda faced Karen, Brad, and Jason. Her voice was serious but subdued, as if granting them a sliver of dignity in their final moments on this flight. "Please follow me off the aircraft now." Karen, nearly drained of strength, bowed her head and began to walk away in utter shame. Her face was ashen, her expression hollow. Any trace of former pride now utterly vanished. Her heavy, trembling steps testified to the bitter cost of abusing power and acting on prejudice. Brad Collins and Jason Miller fared no better. Both fell into step behind Karen, their eyes clouded with regret and humiliation. Brad, the veteran captain, looked decades older in those few minutes, as if the weight of his mistake had aged him overnight. Jason kept his head bowed, too unnerved to meet anyone's gaze. His former arrogance had crumbled under the harsh light of truth. Linda led the disgraced trio down the aisle. None dared glance back. Dozens of passengers still held up their phones, capturing every painful final step. Those lenses were their verdicts. Recording the moment these three faced public accountability. The cabin remained deathly silent, but that stillness felt heavier and more meaningful than any words. Everyone knew they had witnessed a rare moment of justice where the guilty, at last, paid for their wrongdoing. Once the door closed behind Karen, Brad, and Jason, the tension finally began to ebb. Linda returned and stood briefly in the doorway, her face etched with genuine remorse. "Ms. Reed," she said quietly, "I sincerely apologize for my actions. I nearly made an irreparable mistake. I fully understand my responsibility now, and I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences follow." Michelle regarded Linda for a long moment. Her gaze softened slightly, an acknowledgement that Linda, despite her lapse, still had the chance to make things right. In a voice both compassionate and unwavering, Michelle replied, "Linda, you've just learned the most important lesson of your career. Skywing Airlines will never tolerate wrongdoing, but we are always ready to give a second chance to those who do the right thing and stand for justice." Linda nodded, feeling a profound relief. From this moment on, she vowed never to let herself slip so far again. She recognized how fortunate she was to still have the opportunity to redeem herself. Michelle then turned back to address all the passengers, her voice clear and resolute. "I want to apologize sincerely for what you've just experienced. Skywing Airlines is committed to thoroughly reviewing and eradicating any form of discrimination. Today, we've learned a vital lesson. Every person deserves respect and fair treatment regardless of appearance, race, or social position." Her words were met with enthusiastic applause. The earlier tension melted into renewed faith and hope for the airline's future. Michelle knew her work was far from over, but at least she had laid a solid foundation for the sweeping reforms Skywing so desperately needed, and she was ready to carry on this challenging yet profoundly meaningful journey. After the warm applause of the passengers died down, Michelle stood in the first-class cabin, taking in the faces of everyone who had just shared an emotional journey. Her expression was no longer stern or cold, but sincere, full of faith and unwavering resolve. She inhaled deeply and spoke clearly, her voice carrying authority. "Today I stood up against injustice, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever endured discrimination. No one deserves to be treated this way because of their appearance or their race." Her words resonated through the cabin, not only as an affirmation, but as a profound message of ethics and responsibility. The passengers felt the power of her statement, an atmosphere of light and relief, replacing the fear and tension they had just experienced. Beside her, Emily Turner still stood quietly, eyes wide with wonder and emotion at having become part of this historic moment. Michelle turned to the young flight attendant, gently laying a hand on her shoulder, her gaze full of gratitude and trust. "And it's thanks to people like Emily, those brave enough to defend the truth despite the risks, that justice can prevail. Emily, I am pleased to promote you immediately. From this moment on, you will take on an important role at Skywing Airlines as a living symbol of the courage and integrity we aspire to." Emily froze for an instant, unable to believe her ears. Then thunderous applause erupted across the cabin, heartfelt and enthusiastic, honoring her courageous act. Emily felt her heart swell with pride and emotion. She bowed her head in thanks, cheeks flushed, her eyes shining with happiness and newfound confidence. The passengers' cheering continued, a clear show of respect and admiration for Michelle's bold, meaningful decision. In that moment, everyone witnessed a fundamental truth. True power does not lie in titles or wealth, but in courage, ethics, and steadfast commitment to justice. Security Officer Linda Foster stepped forward as well, her initial sternness replaced by respect and a deep awareness of her duty. She nodded quietly, a silent pledge never to repeat such a mistake. Michelle turned back to address the passengers, offering a warm, genuine smile. "I know today's flight didn't go as you expected, but I hope we all leave here with an important message. Every one of us deserves respect and fair treatment regardless of race, status, or appearance. From today onward, Skywing Airlines commits to being a model in the aviation industry not only for our service quality but for respect and equality for every passenger." Her closing words drew resounding applause. Some passengers even rose to their feet, fully endorsing the powerful message she had shared. They understood they had witnessed more than a memorable story. They had seen the beginning of a new era, one where fairness and respect stand above all. As Michelle returned to her seat, the cabin atmosphere settled back to normal. But everyone knew they had witnessed a pivotal turning point, a historic moment that would be remembered as a testament to real leadership and courage. Michelle herself understood that her journey was far from over. But now she felt completely confident and ready to lead Skywing Airlines into a new future. One defined not only by business excellence, but by the way we treat each other. And she knew she would never stand alone. She had allies like Emily Turner beside her, committed to building a better tomorrow for all. This is the story of Michelle Reed's courage, integrity, and genuine leadership. The woman who dared to confront injustice aboard her own airline flight. From this experience, we learned that true power comes not from position or appearance, but from courage, responsibility, and the determination to uphold justice. If you were Michelle Reed in this situation, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this video with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue spreading meaningful messages about equality, respect, and courage. Thank you so much for watching and supporting us.